Number 32, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Democrat, 1933 to 1945, 51 years old, from New York. FDR was the fifth cousin of Theodore Roosevelt. He was a C student at Harvard, enjoyed sailing and stamp collecting. Although he could be very private, FDR brought an easy charm to the White House.
It must have been amazing to meet Franklin Roosevelt. Everybody talks about it, what a strong personality he had. Winston Churchill compared meeting him to opening your first bottle of champagne.
He was a person of enormous personal charm, but so many of his contemporaries say that at bottom they didn't know what made him tick, what was really going on behind what they frequently called the actor's mask of his face.
Mr. Roosevelt's daughter Anna said that he was very difficult to know, that no one really knew him. He was a loner.
FDR was stricken with polio at the age of 39. He was virtually confined to the homemade wheelchair that he personally designed using a kitchen chair. During his presidency, the handicap was downplayed.
He tried to be photographed standing, even though he had to lock these 10-pound leg braces to actually get in a standing position, and had to brace himself on something, a lectern or the arm of an associate.
Clinging to someone's arm, he could disguise his painful steps. He also had a customized Ford that he drove with hand controls. In newsreels, he appeared to be an able-bodied man.
What the newsreels wouldn't show was how he managed to get out of the car. He would have had to have been lifted out. All those images are kept from the public by choice of the media.
Roosevelt's executive leadership, like his Oval Office desk, was often cluttered and chaotic, pitting advisors against each other. It was an unorthodox management style.
Somehow he is the model of the successful president. Frankly, I think he's an unfortunate model. A notion that it's rather nice to have a certain amount of administrative chaos and have your subordinates competing with each other and fighting with each other because that's supposed to make things more creative. But he was not a perfect president by any means. And I think it's a shame that he has been taken as some sort of standard of perfection ever since.
What looks to others sometimes like his messy management style of allowing too many people into the room and letting them all ventilate and so on, I think that's a mistake. I think this was part of his political genius, was to build a political house, if I can put it this way, where all those voices could be heard.
FDR used radio to bring the presidency closer to the people. It is estimated that as many as 60% of Americans tuned in for some of his fireside chats. During his first 100 days in office, FDR pushed an unprecedented slate of legislation through Congress to fight the Depression. This was the start of the New Deal.
The New Deal is a series of initiatives that imparted a much greater degree of security and safety and stability to American life in all kinds of sectors, in the banking sector, in the investment sector, in the home building, home owning sectors, employment, and so on.
The New Deal expanded beyond those first 100 days. In 1935, Congress passed the Social Security Act, creating a safety net for the elderly, disabled, and unemployed. Despite the passage of the Social Security Act, FDR's New Deal didn't put an end to the Depression. It would take the industrial mobilization of World War II to achieve that goal.
In a sense, he didn't succeed any better than Herbert Hoover did economically. Where Roosevelt succeeded was in exuding public confidence, making the Depression more palatable to people, giving people the impression that he really was doing something, that he really cared.
By his second inauguration, FDR was worried that the conservative Supreme Court would nullify the legislative successes of his first term. He concocted a plan to tip the balance of the court by increasing the number of justices.
This seemed to many people to be a kind of power grab that went beyond what was necessary to deal with social problems and reflected a desire for power by Roosevelt himself.
The court-packing plan failed, and Roosevelt's second term became mired in legislative gridlock. The heady days of the New Deal were over, and FDR's claim on presidential greatness was yet to be fulfilled. As early as 1937, FDR saw war on the horizon. He worked to convince isolationist Americans that they might someday need to get involved. That November, FDR broke a precedent set by George Washington when he became the first American president to be elected for a third term.
The scale and the nature of World War II made it, I suppose, all but inevitable that he would continue in this innovative way and in 1940 run for a third term and in 1944 run for a fourth term.
Throughout 1940 and 41, FDR found ways to aid the Allies while remaining officially neutral. But the days of neutrality were about to end.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
If not for his last-minute scribbling, Roosevelt might have used the less memorable phrase, a date which will live in world history. Pearl Harbor heralded the beginning of FDR's new role as a war president.
He was a superb war president, intimately involved in the complicated diplomacy of the war years.
I would argue that the greatest accomplishment of Roosevelt during World War II were the commanding officers he picked, people like George Marshall, Nimitz. You know, these are the great names of World War II, yet Roosevelt was their boss.
Succumbing to anti-Japanese hysteria, FDR ordered the internment of more than 100,000 Japanese Americans on February 19, 1942.
They're feeling.
Roosevelt was always very clear on this. He felt that the most important thing he could do was to win the war, and that was going to help those who were in Hitler's concentration camps the most.
For Roosevelt, winning the war meant launching a massive assault on mainland Europe, D-Day.
Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity.
5 months after D-Day, Roosevelt was re-elected to a fourth term, but he was 62 years old and his health was failing. The end game of the war took place at Yalta in February 1945 with a meeting of the Allies to discuss the shape of the new world order. Here, FDR fulfilled the vision of Woodrow Wilson when he and Churchill convinced Stalin to sign off on the plan for an international peacekeeping organization, the United Nations.
To be ranked as a great president, you almost surely need some kind of crisis that you have to deal with. Roosevelt got handed not one but two crises of enormous proportions.
He had the Depression in the 1930s, and he had a global war in the 1940s. And what is so unique about him is that he had the personal and political tools to excel in both of those crisis situations.
I think the presidency of Franklin Roosevelt changed the presidency more than any other single presidency did in terms of the kinds of policies and actions that the government would now be willing to undertake, and it also changed it in the way in which it made the president himself a titanic figure in the mind of the nation in a way that it had never been before.
With his unusual alchemy of charm and arrogance, improvisation and political cunning, FDR changed the very idea of what it meant to be President of the United States. All future presidents would have to reckon with his legacy.